Hello everybody, and welcome back to another video. In today's video, we'll be talking about the selection of JD Vance to be the Republican nominee for Vice President of the United States. I'll be talking about whether or not I think this was the right pick, how this will impact the election, most importantly, what you should know about JD Vance. So, first of all, my apologies. I would have liked to post this yesterday, but of course, my computer decided to not work. So, this is the delayed video, but we do the best we can here. So we're going to get right into it. JD Vance is the Republican nominee for vice president. Donald Trump picked him a few hours before the RNC began on Monday. And this is a pick that I think has received a lot of opinions. A lot of people are really happy with this, but I think more people, at least from what I've seen, are not happy about this. And when I am saying Republicans. Obviously, doesn't matter what Democrats or partisan Biden voters think about this pick. What matters is what Republicans think because he is their nominee for VP. So, first of all, JD Vance is not someone who has been around in Republican politics for a long time. In 2016, when Trump chose Mike Pence, some people liked that pick, some people didn't at the time. It ended up panning out for him, certainly, because he did win. But Pence had been a name in Republican politics for almost 20 years at that point. JD Vance has really been named in Republican politics for 2 years, and he is only 39 years old, so this is actually the first year he would have been eligible to be, I think, depending on when his birthday is, I think either this year, 2020, would have been the first year he's even eligible to be vice president, so that's important to note. And he, in 2016, was very critical of Trump. He actually called Trump America's Hitler and referred to him as a useful idiot, and he expressed a lot of fear about Trump, and he referred to himself as a never Trump guy. He even said he was considering voting for Hillary Clinton. And I actually believe he did not I don't think he voted for Hillary Clinton in 2016, but I also think that he didn't vote for Trump, certainly. And, it took a while for him to come around. Now, in 2020, he backed Trump. He was a pretty staunch supporter of the president, but, you can't undo what you've said. And, JD Vance is a guy who, has really gone back and forth on this. So that's the first thing that I think is really important to know about JD Vance. In 2016, he was a never Trump guy, and he really, really spoke out against the eventual president in a very negative way. And then, the other main thing to note is that, I said he's only been a voice in Republican politics for around 2 years. But again, JD Vance has been a well-known figure for a while. He actually wrote Hillbilly Elegy, and he wrote that in 2016. It was made into a movie. And actually, in light of the selection of Vance as the VP candidate for the GOP, Hillbilly Elegy is actually, I think, the 6th most purchased movie on Netflix this week. So, a bit of a resurgence there. But, he is very, very, staunch in his, positions regarding the Midwest, regarding, issues traditionally associated with the working class or with voters in a declining Rust Belt. He is very culturally and politically been involved in that conversation for more than 2 years. So that's what you have to know about JD Vance. I would say those are the two main things. He was, a never Trump guy initially in 2016, wrote Hillbilly Elegy around that time, made it into a movie, and he was elected to the Senate in Ohio in 2022. And that brings me to my next, point here, is that we do know what JD Vance, can do electorally. And this is not that impressive of a performance. JD Vance won by around 6.1% in a state that Trump won by over 8%. So he did 2% worse than Trump. And you have to remember that, this was on the same ballot as a 23-point win for Republicans in the governor's race. Mike DeWine beat, I believe it was Nan Whaley, who was the mayor of Dayton, a Democrat, by 23 points in the governor's race. And in the Senate race, this happened. Tim Ryan, the Democrat, only lost by, around 180,000 votes, I believe. So, this is certainly, or no, excuse me, not 180,000 votes, but, you obviously get the idea. I think roughly 270,000 votes, not 180,000. But, this was a 6-point race in a state that is very conservative. This was a midterm where Republicans had a turnout advantage. The electorate that showed up here was actually likely more than Trump. It was probably close to Trump plus 10 or 11. And so Vance really underperformed Trump by 4, maybe 5 points when you look at just the electorate that showed up on election day. And, the most important part of this is that JD Vance when you compare him to Biden 20 or to Trump in 2020, not only did he underperform statewide, but in the working class counties, in all but one of them in the northeastern part of the state, the most well-known, typically Rust Belt working class counties, Tim Ryan outran Biden and JD Vance underperformed Trump. So uh, that really illustrates that there's no evidence JD Vance is, this electoral overperformer, that he brings something new to the table. And I think even if he was, like, say he won by 15 points instead of, 6 points, um, even if that were the case, I don't really see what he'd bring to the ticket, because Donald Trump, the argument for Trump being a good candidate is that he, brings a level of competitiveness to Republicans in the Midwest, because he, kind of turns on that base that no other Republican's been able to get out, really. And in 2022, we saw the consequences of that for the GOP was that without Trump on the ballot, there were areas where their turnout fell and wasn't sufficient to, defeat Democrats. And that's why they didn't do very well in the Midwest in 2022. Whereas Donald Trump, he brings them out. That's why in 2020, relative to the country in the Midwest, was a lot redder than 2022. And in 2016, Trump actually outright won states like Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. But I think that with or without JD Vance, Trump would be competitive in those states. And I think right now, as of today, he's favored to win Wisconsin and Pennsylvania, certainly, potentially even Michigan. I think that's about as close to the state as it gets. And so JD Vance, to me, adding him to the ticket, even though Vance is a Midwestern, kind of populist associated politician, I don't think that actually helps Trump. I think it doesn't add any value. But it does hurt Trump in some ways. JD Vance, said that he would be in support of potentially a national abortion ban. He's made comments about exceptions, for abortion that I think could also be interpreted as him viewing exceptions as not being necessary. He also said in 2022 that that women should stay in abusive marriages for the good of the children. And again, you can make arguments about the context of those clips and of those words he spoke, and you can say, you can justify them, you can argue that. I'm not here to tell you whether or not you should be happy about this pick, whether or not you should vote for Trump and Vance or Biden and Harris. But I am here to say that those statements are, not popular nationwide. When you run on a platform like that, as JD Vance did in Ohio in 2022, you don't do well. And the nation as a whole in 2020 was 12 and a half points bluer than Ohio. So JD Vance can win narrowly in Ohio, but if he were to do that nationwide, he would lose. Now, obviously, JD Vance isn't the GOP nominee for president, but he does have an impact on this race. And I think it's kind of hard to take a position on this, because there's some people who are saying, look, this has no impact. There's some people who are saying, this could change everything. I'm in the middle. I think VPs always have somewhat of an impact, because there's always, think of how many voters there are nationally that are undecided. Probably at least a couple million voters right now who would say they're undecided, given the polls. On average, we have polls that show 15 to 20% of voters right now are either backing a third party or undecided. And so of those millions of voters, certainly some of them are going to be swayed by the VP. And that's just basic math. And in 2020, I read reports of voters who, came home to Biden on election day because of Kamala Harris. I also read reports of voters who came home for Trump on election day because they didn't like Kamala Harris. So, certainly to me, there are implications of this pick. But the good news for Trump is that at the end of the day, he's still the nominee. And Vance, despite his weaknesses, is still only the VP. And his impact is limited. Now, that isn't the reason that I think this is a bad pick. Obviously, I've made clear that I think there's things Vance has said that make him unelectable that, Democrats can really attack. I think the worst thing he's done is what he said in 2016 about, Trumping America's Hitler and how he's an anti-Trump guy. Very easy for Democrats to take that and run with it and say, look, it's very easy to imagine a campaign ad from the Biden-Harris campaign saying, look, don't trust us, but Donald Trump listened to his own VP just 8 years ago, right? We get all that. But I think that the bigger concern for Trump is that he really could have helped himself. I think that had he chosen Glenn Youngkin, we'd be having a different conversation today. Instead of the momentum, shifting a little bit towards Biden in the conversation, and again, there's no evidence that this has moved anything, because it's been a day since this pick was made. We don't have any polling. But again, the conversation has moved a tiny bit towards Biden, I would say. If Trump had picked Glenn Youngkin, I think instead of talking about whether or not he's hurting himself, we'd be saying, is Virginia a toss-up? Can Trump expand the map to blue states? Because Youngkin isn't an anti-Trump guy, but he's also not, in the wing of the GOP that Vance exists in. And he doesn't have any statements that you can kind of take the way we can do with JD Vance and use it to attack Trump or to attack the VP as a whole. Glenn Youngkin has a much better electoral record than Vance. He outran, instead of underperforming by 2, he outran by 12. And, he represents a blue state. As the governor of a blue state, he could potentially actually put that state in play if you're the VP. I think he'd fare better in the suburbs. I think that undecided suburban voters would look a lot more fondly or favorably on Glenn Youngkin than they do on JD Vance, especially given what Vance has said, like about abortion, about divorces and women staying in marriages. And then the other options for Trump, I think, would have been either Marco Rubio or Doug Burgum, who were ruled out in the early hours of Monday. But Burgum wouldn't. I don't think he would have been like a huge slam dunk, but I also think that he would have helped Trump certainly in the suburbs potentially. And I also think that Burgum is a less controversial figure than JD Vance certainly. And then Marco Rubio it would have been the first person of color to be nominated by the GOP on a major ticket on a presidential ticket ever. And I know someone told me that I think like Calvin Coolidge's vice president was Native American. So I read that in a comment section when I made a video about this around a month ago. So I do want to clarify that technically Marco Rubio would not be the first person of color nominated with the GOP, but in modern history, and I think to the majority of Americans, that's how it would be perceived. And then most importantly, the thing with Rubio is that Rubio would have, I think, really done a good job of making the moderate case for Trump, because Marco Rubio himself is not a moderate, but he's outperformed. He's won in the suburbs before in Florida. And in 2016, the lane in the primary that he had was the establishmentarian wing of the GOP. And that's an area that Trump has always struggled a little bit with, even in 2016, even in 2020. So all three of those other picks, I think, had a lot of upside. I think, Trump could have even chosen someone else who wasn't in the conversation, but he went with Vance, who I think was the worst of the 4 main people in that conversation in the final weeks. So this is a bad pick for Trump. And I think I've made that clear throughout this video that I don't think Vance helps. I don't think there's a lot of upside. And I think that his strengths or would-be strengths are already, maxed out by Trump. But I also don't think this changes the election that much. Trump is winning right now. He's the favorite. I think he has a 70% chance as of right now, if you made me guess. And, at this point in time, it's more likely than not, that he'll be the next president. Now, JD Vance hurts him, certainly, and there are millions of undecided voters across this country. It's fathomable that some of them are going to see this, and this will be the factor that leads them to vote for Biden or to not vote for Trump or whatever active protest they take. But I don't think it's enough. Unless this election is decided by 8,000 votes in Wisconsin, 13,000 votes in Michigan, and 11,000 votes in Arizona, I don't think that, people are going to look back at this pick and say this is what cost Trump the election. But regardless, I think this hurts him. I think this was not a good pick. I know a lot of people like JD Vance. Electability-wise, Trump clearly should have gone with someone else. Let me know your thoughts. Let me know if you think this is the right pick. And let me know if you have any suggestions for videos in the future, because I'm always looking to create more content and, take your guys' suggestions. So as always, I'll see you all in the next one, and thank you so much for watching.